Welcome to Taking a Mortgage Application with your host, me, Joseph J. White. In this tutorial, we'll be covering the following topics. Number 1, required documents. Number 2, file creation. Number 3, meeting the client. Number 4, identity verification. Number 5, the application form. And number 6, determining the applicant's needs. So, let's get started. Introduction. The initial consultation with your potential client is a major step in the mortgage application process. There are several considerations for this step, including the location of the meeting, preparing the client for the meeting, including advising him or her of the time involved, who should attend, and what documents to have available, preparing for the meeting, including creating a blank file, verifying the client's identity, completing the application, and determining the borrower's needs. A well-prepared mortgage agent will find that the meeting will usually proceed smoothly, resulting in the potential client transforming into a client. Many mortgage agents often miss the difference between a potential client and a client, since it can occur rather subtly. However, there is a major difference. A potential client is one who is not yet dedicated to completing the transaction with this particular mortgage agent. A client is an individual who has made the decision to complete the transaction with the mortgage agent, usually based on several factors, including trusting the mortgage agent, developing a personal relationship with the mortgage agent, believing in the mortgage agent's technical proficiency, and having the mortgage agent satisfy 4 standard borrower assumptions, which are that the mortgage agent will act in the borrower's best interest, completely analyze the borrower's needs, make appropriate recommendations based on those borrower's needs, and facilitate the transaction to its successful completion. So let's get started by looking at the required documentation. Section 1, Required Documentation. Each type of mortgage transaction requires documentation to be obtained from the applicant in addition to a signed mortgage application. The following list outlines those documents as well as the purpose behind obtaining each. A client should be instructed to provide these, as applicable, at the initial consultation. So let's turn to page 6 and we'll have a look at the documents required for different types of transactions. We'll actually get into a great amount of detail in these documents in the module on supporting documents, but it is important that we understand what documents we need to get when we take an application. For example, documentation required for all transactions include employment verification. Employment documentation requirements vary from lender to lender. However, the following is a list of documents that's typically acceptable for an employee. A letter of employment, pay stubs, a T4, an NOA, which is a notice of assessment. It's often requested when there's a commissioned income, or a tax return. That also could be requested when there's commissioned income. For self-employed individuals, the following may be required: financial statements, a business license, or a business check. We also have to look at the PIPEDA consent. This document allows the mortgage agent to use the applicant's personal information for the purposes contained within the consent form, such as marketing to the borrower going forward. We also need photo identification. Photo ID is required to prove the identity of the applicant. The original document should be viewed and a photocopy obtained for the file. A divorce or separation agreement, if applicable, outlines the terms and conditions of the separation or divorce and will typically include any payments that are required to be made for alimony. With regards to child support orders, if this document is applicable, this will outline the terms and conditions of child support, including any payments that are required to be made. Now let's take a look at some specific documents for a purchase transaction. The following is a list of documents that are typically required when a client is purchasing a property. We start with the standard, a purchase and sale agreement. We would also need an MLS listing, proof of down payment, a rental letter, if applicable, and we need the realtor information. When we look at a refinance, equity takeout, or a switch, we're looking at specific documents such as a current mortgage statement, the charge or mortgage that's currently on the property, the transferred or deed of land which shows ownership, the property tax statement, the property insurance policy, and the mortgage repayment history if applicable. Now let's take a look at file creation, an important step in ensuring that we always have the information that we need right at our fingertips. In this section, we're going to look at file creation. Every mortgage application file should have the same checklist. A typical file can be made up of a legal-size folder with 2 forms stapled to the inside of the folder. That's what I used to suggest to agents when I was managing. On the left side will be a checklist, and on the right side, a worksheet for notes and calculations. Mortgage agents may have different styles of files, and the information may be in different formats or in varying orders. However, the information is essentially the same. Let's look at a file checklist. A file checklist is a key component for ensuring that the required documentation is obtained on every transaction. This prevents the embarrassment of having to go back to a client for additional documentation in the future and provides a quick summary of what is in the file. If the file is broken in sections based on the checklist, then every file will follow the same order, allowing the mortgage agent to know where to find specific documents in any file. A colored sheet or file folder can be used to separate each section of the file for ease of filing documents. Proper completion of the checklist and the worksheet will allow the mortgage agent to quickly reacquaint him or her with the file, especially if the file hasn't been worked on for several days or if there are several files being processed simultaneously. In the top section, the client's contact information is noted, and it's helpful to mark the best time and contact number to reach the client should the need arise. The next section allows the mortgage agent to check off the documents that are in the file and acts as a reminder for documents that are typically required for every transaction, as well as the documents specifically for a condo, refinance, equity takeout, switch, or purchase. The final section is dedicated to disclosure documents. Each file must have each of these documents except for the investor-lender disclosure, which is applicable on a private transaction. The file worksheet is a key component used for recording notes and, more importantly, providing a quick summary of the file. This can be particularly important if more than one person is working on the file, if the mortgage agent is working on several files simultaneously, or if the file hasn't been worked on in some time. In the top section is a brief summary of the mortgage request, including the amount, the rank, the purpose of the mortgage, the GDS and TDS, the credit score, and the date the credit bureau was completed. This date should be changed whenever a new credit report is pulled on the client to ensure that, in the case that there are several credit bureaus on file, the most recent one will be readily known. Now, let's have a look at meeting the client. Section 3, Meeting the Client. There are 3 basic places where a mortgage agent can meet a client: the client's home, the mortgage agent's office, or another outside location. There are several positive and negatives for each location, but it is important to focus on providing good customer service for the client, so wherever is best for the client is often the right choice. Wherever the meeting takes place, it's vital that the trust be created with the client as soon as possible. The different locations simply necessitate different processes to create this trust. It's also important to begin every meeting, regardless of where it occurs, with a positive attitude and professional demeanor. To make a good first impression, it's important to dress like a professional, be on time, and be well prepared. Once in the meeting, ask open-ended questions, listen well, and take notes. Taking notes from the beginning of the meeting before the actual interview begins is an important way of telling the client that the mortgage agent believes that what the client has to say is important. Now, meeting with the client is a vital part of the sales process, but it is outside the scope of this module. So, for more information and additional tips, please have a look at our website at www.remic.ca. Now, let's have a look at identity verification. Section 4, Identity Verification. In today's mortgage market, identity theft and impersonation are a significant concern, making it necessary for the mortgage agent to verify the identity of his or her client at the initial consultation. Regardless of whether the appointment is conducted at the client's residence or elsewhere, the mortgage agent must obtain photo identification for all clients. Where possible, a photocopy should be taken of this identification, but if not possible, then an attestation to the fact that the identification was viewed must be made and put in the file. In all cases, the statement below that best represents the circumstances of the identity verification should be included in the application when submitted to the lender, ideally in the notes section. 3 forms of typical attestations based on differing circumstances are: first, I have or have not met the client before, however I have viewed photo identification in the form of whatever that photo identification is, and attest to the fact that it appears to be an accurate representation of the client. Or, the client is a previous client of mine and I have viewed photo identification in the form of, again, whatever that form is, and attest to the fact that it appears to be an accurate representation of the client. Or, in the case of taking an application by email or through the internet where personal contact isn't possible, I have or have not met the client before and have not personally met the client in this transaction and therefore cannot verify the client's identity through photo identification. While obtaining photo identification is not legally mandated as of the date of publication, it is best practice and should be followed without fail to protect the integrity of the transaction and the security of all parties involved. In so doing, the mortgage agent affirms his or her professionalism to both of his or her clients, the lender and the borrower. If the borrower protests, inform him or her that it is for their protection. If the client continues to protest, this should be taken as a red flag for fraud, and the mortgage agent should refuse to continue with the transaction until the client agrees to produce valid identification. Now that we've looked at all of these additional points, let's get into actually taking a mortgage application. I'd like you to refer to the manual on pages 20 to 25 for complete section-by-section descriptions of a mortgage application. While the application in your manual may look different than, for example, a Filogix application, the information contained in the application is the same. But before you go to the manual, let's discuss a few tips for a complete application, since one of the main complaints that underwriters have is receiving incomplete applications from brokers. First, we need to complete all fields. Ensure that all fields of the application are completed, whether or not information is obtained for that field. For example, if the field does not apply to the application, it is best to enter an NA, or not applicable, in that field. If the field is left blank, someone viewing the application in the future will be unable to determine if the information was missed being entered or if it was not applicable to this applicant. Compare information with the documentation. When taking an application, verify that what the applicant is saying matches the information found in the supporting documentation. Some applicants may inadvertently provide inaccurate information such as employment income or outstanding balances on his or her mortgage or other debts. Signature. When completing a paper application, ensure that the applicant sign the application. By having the client's signature on the application, the mortgage agent has consent to complete the necessary investigations to obtain a commitment from a lender. Although verbal authorization is acceptable, some applicants may dispute providing authorization at some point in the future. For example, if an applicant is declined and 6 months later attempts to obtain financing, he or she may not recall the reason for the inquiry on his or her credit bureau. The applicant may then contact Equifax or TransUnion, whichever credit reporting agency the inquiry was found through, and request that the inquiry be removed. Equifax or TransUnion will contact the mortgage agent or mortgage brokerage to request the authorization for that credit inquiry. If there is no signed application, the applicant may have a case that the mortgage agent initiated the credit inquiry without the applicant's authority, which is a breach of the contract between the credit reporting agency and the brokerage. And finally, the notes. The mortgage application form itself does not provide space for explanatory notes. The mortgage agent should use a separate piece of paper or a notes page, such as a worksheet, to make notes relevant to the application. For example, if the applicant indicates that he or she has past credit issues, the mortgage agent must document that information and include it in the loan submission to the lender. This could be included in, for example, a Philogix application which does have a notes section for notes for the lender. Now that we've taken our client's application, we need to determine the correct product for him or her. To do so requires us to complete a needs assessment. Because we're not order takers like the person who works at the McDonald's drive-thru, we have to be advisors, ensuring that we assist our clients in obtaining the right product based on their needs and circumstances. So I'm going to suggest at this stage that you pause the presentation, refer to the manual, pages 20 to 25, for the complete section-by-section descriptions of the mortgage application, and once you've completed that, come on back to the presentation. We will be waiting for you. Section 6, Determining the Applicant's Needs. Determining the applicant's needs is the most important step in completing the application. To determine the applicant's needs, specific questions must be asked. The form on page 25 of your manual, which is an applicant needs assessment and can be produced without permission, will assist in determining those needs. Once the form has been completed, the mortgage agent can search for specific products that meet that applicant's needs. Please have a look at this form and, once done, review the key terms and definitions at the end of the manual. And that brings us to the end of this module. Your next step is to ensure that you read the chapter in your textbook and complete the chapter review questions. The answers to those questions are at www.remic.ca.